The easiest way to explain this is if I've done everything that I can at that point to avoid the situation, well, then I need to do whatever it takes to get out of it. You know, maybe I trap an arm, maybe I figure out what I need to do next, but maybe he has other buddies that are in the fight as well, and I want to get that guy off me immediately. My blade is gonna find a nerve bundle in your hip a lot faster than my knuckle or my fist would. And that's just something that's gonna give that level of response and immediate control over the situation so that I'm not at a disadvantage.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes. Our informational content cannot address all dangerous situations and cannot guarantee your survival or prevent injuries when the unexpected happens. The decision to carry a firearm, either for recreation or for personal defense, carries the risk and potential for injury and/or death. Therefore, it is advised that you seek out and acquire proper training before using a firearm or any firearm-related product.
What are some self-defense techniques?
What would happen if there was a global internet outage?
What should I do if I hear shots ringing out?
Or what I should do if there's a major terrorist attack?
What should I have? What's the
What
best?
should I do?
What does that look like?
What would you recommend? Is there anything I could do?
All right, guys, welcome back to Dangerous Questions, an Ironclad original. This episode, we're gonna talk about blades. Blade work, blade training, how to use a blade, how to manipulate a blade. Probably one of my top 3 subjects I like to talk about. And I really took this subject to heart coming into the military. You know, being a SEAL, looking at all the different combatives and hand-to-hand techniques that were being utilized, even by our own military, or what I learned growing up, you know, as a kid, or even in our culture. It just seemed like a principle that was very, very, very lacking. And I just took that to heart because I remember going into the teams and not really having much knowledge of what to do with a blade. So as I started to progress in my career, I started to seek out the best places to go, who was really doing this well. I mean, when you look at a blade and when you're starting carrying a blade, or you've never carried a blade to begin with, or even if it's just a folder for work or utilitarian purpose, you don't ever really start thinking about it in the standpoint of like utilizing it or being used against you. And a lot of the times there's like this line that we draw. We're like, I'm not really comfortable with it, so I'm not gonna do it. And that's what I wanted to get over. I wanted to get so comfortable with it that it was a second nature part of my life. It became a lifestyle, which is why I carry a blade every single day. And I think if that you're looking at self-defense and you want to increase your capabilities, you should be doing that as well. So hopefully in this segment, in this episode, we cover some of these questions well enough for you guys to at least understand a couple principles. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys' support. Thanks for coming back. All right, let's get to the first question, which is a video submission.
Hello, Dom. My question is, what's the ideal position to carry a concealed blade? Is it the front pocket? If you have carbon pens in the bottom pocket, I usually run it on my side. I feel like it's the best position. If I'm stepping away from the fight and I have to use it, I can take it out, switch and attack. And I feel like it's harder for the opponent, the enemy, to go for my hand to stop me because I'm already pushing here. If I go here, I feel like if I take it out here, he can still control my hand. Thank you for your time, and God bless you.
Yeah, God bless you too. And this is a great question because it highlights a couple of different points that are really important when you start carrying a blade or you understand how to even carry any type of weapon, firearm. And one of our principles that you see him doing right away, if you watch his body language and he talks about creating that space, controlling that reactionary gap, it really is to put that weapon side back. And the first question that he asked about what's the best place to carry, I'm always going to ask the question, well, what's the context? What's the lifestyle that you live? How are you moving throughout your day? What combative background do you have? All these things are going to add up to how you carry and what type of style that you deploy your blade in. Is it a fixed blade? Is it a folder? There's pros that I've worked with along the way that have a decent amount of blade experience, blade training, and blade application. And some of those guys just like carrying on that lead side to be able to draw, and they carry at about a 9 o'clock. I don't. I typically, when given a choice, I'm always going to carry appendix on my dominant side. There's a lot of reasons for that. The first one that's very clear that will point this out to you guys is because I typically carry a firearm. 95% of the time, I am carrying a firearm at about 5 o'clock. So when I push somebody away, or I need to create that space in that reactionary gap, I am carrying my firearm where you just identified that you like to carry your blade, specifically because of that purpose of creating enough distance so I can put my weapon side back. What does that do? Two things. First, gives me time and space to draw, but it also takes whatever firearm or blade that I'm looking to deploy and gets distance away from you so you can't access it. Now, without getting too into this, because I talk a lot about this on my Blade Work series on our website, is I have a couple of different blade modules that you can go through that I will break every single one of these down into detail. But the idea is that a firearm, it takes a lot to be able to get that up online. And what do I mean? Well, if the gun is pointed down in its holstered position and I start drawing, it's still not a threat to you, even if I pull up on the gun and it's still pointed down to the ground. Now, anybody with a basic level of common sense understands that, which is why you see people untrained doing weapon takeaways all the time, because they're like, bad stuff comes out of the front of the gun and I don't want it anywhere near me. Now, take the contrast to that with the blade being in the front. As soon as a blade breaks the sheath and you've got an inch of the blade showing, well, the blade can be a threat to anybody that's trying to grab onto it. It's easier to grab onto a gun than it is a blade, because it's hard to get your hand wrapped around the blade without getting cut, because everything else of the blade is covered. Now, that's a little bit of the methodology that I contrast on why I carry appendix and why I carry my firearm on my dominant side at about 5 o'clock. If you only choose to carry a blade, there might be some logic to being able to do that at the 5 o'clock. That way you can get your weapon side further back than it would be if you were carrying in the appendix position. Now, I can still blade my body, and the appendix position is further back too. And people that carry appendix firearm would argue the same thing. The next part of this, without going too nitty gritty, is that for you guys, it really comes down to a level of comfort as well. Where are you comfortable carrying? What feels natural to you? Yes, do you need to work through some of those things and make it second nature and make it intuitive, of course, but I strongly encourage you guys to try different spots. Buy a trainer, use different types of blades, and then also figure out what's gonna work best for you. But if I had to choose, it would be that dominant side if I was only carrying a single blade. I don't do that. I've changed to this methodology because it's a methodology I understand and I train with often. And I know that even if somebody was on top of me from a grappling perspective, I would be able to be on my back and still have access to my appendix position, as opposed to having to go back here while I'm giving up a little bit of what I can cover. Because if you think about that too, that's the contrast of appendix versus this, is that I can still cover up some of my body and quickly access, as opposed to having to reach back where now I'm exposed and I could potentially get that arm trapped behind me. Important question, and there's so much to it. So again, seek more training, but on the surface level, both of those are really good. And then what you choose, is it going to be, do you carry a firearm or not? Is that a methodology that you choose, or are you only carrying a blade? I want to keep going into these so much further, but again, got blade modules on our website at crusheverything.com, and there's also a lot of guys out there putting good information out. Kelly McCann, Sayok, these are just a couple of the guys that do understand how to deploy those blades and carry them on a daily basis. All right, guys, this segment of Dangerous Questions is also brought to you by Mountain Tough. Mountain Tough Plus is the fitness app that's trusted by the dedicated. Who's the dedicated? You guys watching this show. We care about our ability to become assets and to be able to handle these situations, these scenarios. We're asking these questions for a reason. This is a fitness app that gives you no excuses and sets a level of fitness mindset that you guys can take with you everywhere. Mountain Tough is an all-access subscription platform. It gives you access to everything that they have available. World-class home fitness programs, mental training, self-improvement, prehab, rehab, everything that you guys need to set a solid foundation of fitness for your life. Again, fitness is really important to me, and I highly recommend this fitness app. And here on Dangerous Questions, we talk about it all the time. You've got to be prepared. Mountain Tough is giving an exclusive discount for all Dangerous Question listeners. Use the code DANGEROUS at mountaintough.com. on the monthly subscription. You'll get your first month free, and that's on top of the 14-day free trial, giving you guys 6 weeks to test this out. 6 weeks of free trading at mountaintough.com. Go check it out. Okay, let's get to the next question. When using a knife defensively, what strategies or techniques do you emphasize to neutralize a threat without overextending or losing control? So basically what they're asking on this question is, I don't want to go over the top. You know, we see this from a legal standpoint all the time. And again, there's other questions in here as well. It's like, I'm not an attorney. I don't live in your state. I don't know your laws and your rules. But what I'm going to explain to you is the methodology and strategies that I'm thinking of to not go over the top, to not lose control with what I need to do. First and foremost, it starts with the most basic of all principles, and that's to de-escalate and avoid. If I've truly done everything I can to break contact and avoid this situation altogether, well then what's finally presenting me is that my back is against the wall and the person in front of me is a real threat in my life or my family's life, and I need to do something about that. That's why I carry a force multiplier. So if I have an opponent that's bigger than me, if I have an opponent that's more physical than me, I can use this as a force multiplier if I find myself in a position that's less advantageous that I might lose my life over. The easiest way to explain this is if I've done everything that I can at that point to avoid the situation, well then I need to do whatever it takes to get out of it. Now, you might have different training than I do, and that means different things for everybody. But if somebody's in the mount position and they're swinging at me and I'm already stunned and I need to get out of this, well, what can I do to get that guy off of me effectively? You know, maybe I trap an arm, maybe I figure out what I need to do next, but maybe he has other buddies that are in the fight as well, and I want to get that guy off me immediately. You know, I'm going to talk about this again, but you know, my blade is going to find a nerve bundle in your hip a lot faster than my knuckle or my fist would. And that's just something that's going to give that level of response and immediate control over the situation so that I'm not at a disadvantage. And again, it goes to that next level. Is that enough, or do I need to escalate even further to mitigate this threat or neutralize the threat by whatever means necessary? So the strategy is avoid, de-escalate, get out of there at all costs. And if that's not possible, what do I need to do to defend myself, depending on my level of training? One of the things that I love about training with a blade is that you not only know how to utilize it, but you know how to defend against it, and then that level of aggression. You know, if you ever fought against somebody that has no training, it's like, you know, a lot of times it's out of control, you know, whether it's jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai. And when you start training, you realize your level of control and you realize what pressure to put on. So I can't stress it enough to just get the proper training so that you know what level to use and when not to, and then be able to de-escalate or break contact if necessary. All right, next question. In a tactical situation, how do you smoothly transition from a firearm to knife, and what drills do you recommend for mastering this skill with a Dynamis blade? So again, Dynamis blades, they're all fixed blades. Why do we do that? Because it's less moving parts. Its transition is immediate and it's effective. It's right in your hand and it's ready to be utilized. Now, there aren't many circumstances. Is it possible? Yes, of course, but they're rare in a circumstance that I'm thinking, oh, I just needed to get in a gunfight, but now I'm gonna de-escalate to go to my blade. You know, in a tactical setting, that makes sense. And from a civilian situation or being out in the street, it's hard to really come up with a scenario where I just needed to use my gun, engage multiple threats, and then put that away to take my blade out. You know, maybe I ran out of ammo. Maybe there's multiple threats I need to deal with, and that is realistic. So what am I going to do to get there? And it really is very simple, but it comes down to repetition, knowing where your gear is. I think if I were to tell you anything, it's that you've got to know without even looking and upside down and backwards in the dark that you know how to reference your blade and your firearm. That way you're not sitting there looking around like, oh, I can't put my gun away and where's my blade? Even if I was in a dynamic scenario where I just got tossed around, I was on the ground, I stood back up, you know, I have my gun out, but I want to put that away and then transition. It's like, okay, I'm just going to slowly transition my gun. I'm going to put my gun away and then I'm going to get my blade out. I mean, it's really not more complicated than that. I think where it gets more complicated would be is if my gun's out, or my blade's out, and then I'm going to transition to the firearm, which is a realistic scenario too, where I've got my blade loaded in my hand, then I want to draw. And we go over that transition throughout our training as well, where I'm already preloaded with the blade, and then I transition to my firearm, still have the blade in my hand, which is why I talk about using reverse grip more than anything else. Do I want to use forward grip? Sure, there's a time and a place for it. But reverse grip allows me to do a lot of my manipulation while holding the firearm as well, and then smoothly transition with that put away. And then typically what I'm doing with both loaded is a simple transition of the firearm into my other hand, put the blade away, and then get it back up and running. Again, the context of these scenarios is just like medical. Win the fight, self-aid, buddy aid. It's the same thing. I've got to win whatever fight is going on. If I've got my firearm out, I'm going to win that fight that's right in front of me. Then I'm going to transition to the blade. So just to put some light on that, hopefully that explains that to you guys, but you've got to get the repetition in. And if you know anything from this question, is like rep it out enough where you're not wondering or trying to find where the sheath or the holster is. You just know right away. You reference it and can put it away. Hey everybody, this episode of Dangerous Questions is also brought to you by Aimpoint. If you're interested in red dot sights, you should definitely check them out. They've been leading the industry in red dots for about 50 years, and they're highly trusted by elite agencies, special forces, and professional hunters worldwide. Their Acro P2 is the ultimate compact closed emitter sight for pistols, carbines, and rifles. And their Duty RDS is perfect for patrol rifles. Aimpoint supports the men and women who protect and serve our country. And they extend a special discount to qualified U.S. law enforcement, military, and first responders, both active and retired. Go check them out at aimpoint.us/dangerous questions. The link is down below, and you can use the code dq.podcast to get a discount. Appreciate your support, guys. All right, next question. Should you learn hand-to-hand fighting before stepping into blades, or can you learn both at the same time? This is a great question. I think you pretty much answered the question yourself, is that you can learn them at the same time. This is the difference between martial arts and combatives. Any great combative instructor, and just to name a few, you've got Lee Morrison, Kelly McCann, the SEAC guys, Dave Camarillo, Tony Blair. These are a few of the guys that are out there that understand that if I'm going to use blades, it's already inherently combative. When I pull my blade out, I am absolutely thinking about I can still hit, hammer fist, strike, knee, kick. None of those things are out of play. I don't want to just think, well, now that I got the blade out, that's all that I'm doing. In fact, I would shy away from that with everything that you possibly can. If you're going to get very blade-specific skills, okay, fine, but if that guy understands anything about combatives, he should be teaching you the same thing like we do in all of our blade courses. I get very specific, but I never, ever, ever take the opportunity out to talk about combatives. Again, if my blade's out, well, I still need to worry about somebody hitting me, so I need to worry about still hitting and blocking as well, so I can trap and close the distance. If you're doing martial arts, just understand that, martial arts is exactly that. You went there to box. That's all you went there to do. Well, you're going to be really hard pressed to go to a boxing academy that's going to say, oh yeah, pull your blade out, and that's going to be normal. Lean towards combatives if that's not an option and you have to isolate them. When you do your drilling, never forget that they're inseparable. The same thing I tell guys that do BJJ all the time. If you're on the mats, I should still be thinking about, I can bite the guy here, I can slap the guy here, I can headbutt him here, I can hit the groin here. Don't stop thinking about those, because if you do that in any other martial art that you do, you're actually creating bad habits. You're not getting good repetition. Combine the two, and whenever possible, train both of them together. Next question. All right, when is a blade appropriate as a force multiplier? Pretty much always, especially when I'm able to carry it. From a legal standpoint, does a firearm equal knife? If so, and I carry both, when should the knife come out over the firearm? Okay, great question. And again, from a legal standpoint, I said this earlier, but I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to sit here and break down the legal parameters of what you need to do and what you shouldn't do, because there's a lot of gray area. It's very ambiguous in some places, and some places it's not. It's black and white. But just from the standpoint of a force multiplier, I want to carry my blade whenever possible, because it is exactly that, it's a force multiplier. But also, think about the destruction that a firearm can do over a blade. I can stick my blade in a hip socket and hit a bundle of nerves and shut nerves down, or at least get a shock response to be able to get somebody off of me so they know, like, oh, that's a blade, and I feel something happening where I don't have to sit there and pull the trigger and blow a hole out in somebody else. So there is a level of application that I think we could apply reasonably to know, like, look, I could take my blade out and never really do any major damage, but what I can do is have that force multiplier in my hand. So not only is it there and somebody knows I could use it, but it also allows me to grab and manipulate limbs, where a firearm is not necessarily going to allow me that advantage without locking up my hand. You know, if I have a firearm in my hand, I can't really grip or do anything else with it. I kind of need to protect and keep that back at that point, as opposed to the blade. It really does allow me to fully utilize both limbs completely still without losing a capability. And again, if I'm not clear about that, it's understanding the advantage over a firearm versus a blade is that I can still grab your neck, your arm, your leg, I can pull, I can clinch, I can still do all those things without utilizing and not utilizing one hand, as opposed to the firearm, where now I'm totally locked up in that position and I need to protect it and move you around. So hopefully that contrast is enough for you to see the advantage one over the other. Because if my firearm's coming out, I mean, something's gone really, really bad. If my blade's coming out, I mean, it's bad, but I can manipulate and try to at least de-escalate to the point where I can break contact. And that is the contrast. Again, legal standpoint, not going to talk about it, but the methodology of why I think the way that I do, a blade versus a firearm, it should be very clear. Also, if there's any other firearms introduced into the environment, that's a clear indicator that I probably need to use my firearm, especially if I'm further than arm's length distance, because I need to be able to take those shots immediately, because that could be a threat to me or my family. Now, let's take firearms out of the equation. I have my firearm on me, but this is getting combative. This might be a situation where I can handle with my hands and or my blade and not necessarily introduce the firearm unless I feel like I'm getting overwhelmed and I'm losing the advantage in the fight and I'm losing the upper hand. Hopefully that cleared it up.
Order now, the two women who were killed and found dismembered in Juarez on Sunday were from El Paso.
On the southern border, there is a legal concept known as reasonable fear, a lifeline for those fleeing violence.
A Texas couple was found tortured and murdered.
Police say so far this month, 11 women have been killed in Juarez.
And then their bodies or body parts offered up to Santa Muerte as an offering. She represents death.
In this special Borderland docuseries, I take a deep dive onto true crime stories. Join me as we uncover the truth about the fear behind the crisis.
This was a group of powerful people.
Never been seen before in Mexico.
Evidence of ritualistic elements.
We ended up rescuing almost 200 kids.
The discovery of multiple women in mass graves.
They're almost in every state.
When you put it together, you have an economic extortion map.
But even more violent.
Officials are warning of a widespread cybersecurity attack.
Frustrations and delays have continued as countless are still without power.
Market volatility is at its highest since the pandemic.
There are a number of reports across the state.
Unidentified cracking news. There is no doubt our grid is at risk.
The market is entering airspace.
Let's get to the scenario breakdowns, which is where we're at now. And these are good too. These scenarios will help highlight what we're discussing right now. So let's watch the first video. So we both have blades out. We're on the street. This is in Colombia. We've got multiple people all over the place. So you never know who else is going to be involved in this. They're both in reverse grip. So there's a little bit of that language there that kind of tells me that they either mirrored each other or there's a level of experience here, but they're both kind of dancing around, jumping around. Again, they're mirroring each other's behavior, and that happens in the street often. As soon as you see somebody put their hands up, what do? You put your hands up. So this is really foolish in my opinion, and I talk about this in my blade work. We just talked about a scenario where is a blade over a firearm a good choice, or where is a firearm over a blade a good choice? This is where a firearm comes into play. If I have a threat that's holding a blade in front of me, my firearm is going to come out now because I don't want to do blade on blade. I don't want to sit here and do this dance, right? Because now we're talking about methodologies and we're talking about getting in close and having to close the distance with the blade. If I'm truly in danger and there's a threat to my life or my family, I'm going to pull that gun out and try to neutralize the threat immediately. Maybe I don't even have to pull the trigger. Maybe I can just put him in his place and say, hey man, put the blade down or get out of here. So this is a good example of firearm over blade. The other thing is, from a tactics perspective, I'm never going to have reverse grip against another blade. There's no absolutes, I shouldn't say never, but more than likely I'm not going to be in reverse grip because what happens? They both have their dominant side back and they're in reverse grip. You lose a lot of distance that way as opposed to having the blade in a forward position where I gain more distance with blade on blade. Again, I don't want to get into a blade on blade position to begin with, but just something to consider when you're staring at this video and you're watching the rest of this unfold. All right, hit play. So these guys continue to do the dance and somebody lands a strike. Now, you're going to tell really quickly here that he hits him right in the face, and I think it was an ocular shot. Now, if you guys know anything about my training as well, an ocular shot stops fights. I don't care how big you are. I don't care how tough you are. This guy's adrenaline's pumping. He gets hit in the eye, boom, right there. He turns around because his adrenaline's pumping. He thinks about engaging, and he's just done. He knows it. He knows he's done. He's grabbing his eye, and I don't know the follow-up to this video, but that's game over. And then they break contact, and they're doing all this dancing around, and he gets smacked in the face, and then was it worth it? Whatever they were toiling over or whatever they were fighting over, was it worth it? You've got two pretty long objects that these guys are holding in reverse grip, mirroring each other back and forth on the street, and now this guy probably just lost his eyesight in his left eye, and over what is really the question here. But it's a learning point, both from the standpoint of how do we escalate and de-escalate. And I'm going to tell you one last thing about this. If I see a guy with a blade in reverse grip and he's coming after me in the street, I'm honestly not even going to pull my blade out. My blade is going to stay right where it's at. You know why? Because I still want to be able to manipulate him with both of my hands and block. So that shot that came over his head and hit him in the eye would have been able to be defended if I had both hands to be able to crash in and be able to block that hand and then control his limb and his body and then be able to crush the guy. Clear, control, crush. It's more of an asset to me to have the ability to grip and manipulate and block than it is to have the blade out. Again, the blade, unless, as you see in this video, strikes in the ocular, a lot of the times it's not going to be an immediate effect like we think it's going to in the street. I know guys personally that have been stabbed in the heart in the middle of a fight and didn't even know they got stabbed. Right in the middle of the aorta, they were bleeding out. Somebody came up and wiped the thick, dark blood off their chest and like, hey man, are you okay? And then he passed out. Luckily, they rushed him to the hospital, were able to save his life. But I think he died for a moment, minutes at that point. But they were able to do open heart surgery, rip his chest open. But he had no idea that he even got hit because the adrenaline was pumping so much. So it just goes to show you how fast these things can happen. And if I'm in a real fight like this, I want the ability to manipulate that hand and that limb as much as possible. All right, a lot of good learning points with these blade videos. Let's get to the next video. So you've got two guys standing off here in the street, one shorter guy, one guy's already got his hands up, right? So much to learn from this. Now this guy's fumbling around with his pocket, he switches hands. Now you're just gonna see the guys go back and forth. I'm not sure if this guy actually got stabbed or if any of those strikes penetrated his abdomen there. But they're in this dynamic environment. You're on the street, you're stepping over fences, you're in the bushes, you got trees behind you. I mean, I love it for training purposes. But then he just trips right over the next part of the fence and he falls right on his butt. Right? Plan for that. That's what I tell people all the time. Plan for those scenarios. Now, his back's all wet right here, and I actually thought initially, I was like, maybe he got hit in the aorta and he was just gushing blood. But I think the street's wet, and that's why his shirt got all soaked right here, because he's rolling around in it and then falls down again in the back where I really can't see. Yeah, you can see he's already soaking wet right there. The key things to think about here, When his hands were up, already moving around, that guy should have already had that fence and that obstacle up between them already. That way he didn't just get shot in the face, because that strike could have been what led to him getting knocked out. Put that obstacle in between you, get your hands up immediately. If that guy's already looking aggressive, put your hands up. The second learning point here, if you go back more towards when he starts drawing the blade, you can see that he hasn't had many reps here, because he reaches down with his left hand, but then switches hands and puts the blade in his right hand. So there's a lot of fumbling around. And if you're really going to trust your blade or what you're carrying on a daily basis to save your life, get the reps in, know where it's at, get the reference points. I shouldn't have to think about this to be able to grab onto my blade and get this thing out and deployed to be able to affect this. Last point that I'll say about this specific scuffle: was it necessary to pull his blade or his folder or whatever it was he had out of his pocket in this scenario? I am going to go ahead and say no, it wasn't, because he threw a fist. They're talking back and forth in the street. He's got his hands up. This could have been mitigated by just putting my hands up initially and then figured out what was going on. It's one-on-one. It doesn't look like that guy's going to overpower him necessarily, and it just looks like a back and forth. Again, I don't have the exact context, but I can say with a lot of confidence that the blade really didn't need to come out to be able to mitigate this completely and then shift gears. Now, if the guy started to get overwhelmed and really was at a disadvantage and he was being attacked overtly, could he have justification to be able to pull that out and save his life? Yes, but I'm not seeing that here, and that just opens up a whole, bunch of things where it's like, do you really want to be stabbing this guy, in a street that could have been mitigated with your hands and possibly having that guy lose his life? Again, I don't have the context. There could have been a lot of pre-fight that we don't have here, but they are great learning points. Know where your blades are. If you're going to deploy them effectively. Get your hands up in the middle of a fight like this. Don't be sitting there with your hands down. And even if you're carrying something that you think you're going to deploy, that can happen to people too, where they're like, oh, this is getting really bad. I want to get my blade out. Well, the quickest way for me to get my blade out is to have my hands down near my waistband. Well, that doesn't matter. That's great. That's why we talk about that shield draw in our blade work episodes, is that you want to have that shield up. The biggest threat is his fist, which if he had any better of a shot, that might have been lights out. Then he's getting soccer kicked in the head. Then he's going to the hospital and he's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And that's what we want to avoid. These were all great questions, guys. And again, at the end of the day, they were about blades, so I could sit here and talk about this stuff all day. More questions like that, guys. I love talking about blades, manipulation, combatives. God bless you guys. Thanks for watching Dangerous Questions, an Ironclad original. Until the next time, peace.